Our guest today is Commissioner of the Department of Innovation and Technology and the Chief Information Officer for the City of Chicago. She has focused her team on, number one, Mayor Emanuel's commitment to an open and data-driven government. Number two, building Chicago's open data program into one of the largest in the country. And number three, implementing the groundbreaking WindGrid spatial analytics platform. I know, it takes a while. One more time, Paul. Implementing the groundbreaking WindGrid spatial analytics platform, not bad, into every level of government, and integrating advanced analytics and real-time data-driven decision-making across the city. Our guest today earned her bachelor's degree and master's degree in public policy from the University of Chicago. She lives in Chicago with her husband, Kendrew, and two sons, Alex and Evan. Ladies and gentlemen, Brenna Berman. Brenna? Thank you. All right, have fun.
Don't worry, I'll explain most of what he said. So thank you all so much for being here today. Before I jump in, I'm going to add a couple of names to the wonderful list that Jay just provided. I have a couple members of my team here today who help tremendously with all of the work that I'm going to share with you today. And they're all around the room, so I'd ask them just to give a little bit of a wave as I introduce you to them, because they work tirelessly day in and often day out, because most of our work is done late into the evenings. So first, some of my deputies who are my direct reports, my incredible executive team, Danielle Demera, Carlton Nolan, and Rod Warren, probably mostly over there. Running telecom and most of our data infrastructure, Kevin Kirby and Amy Niersbach. From our data analytics team, Jean Linus and Jonathan Levy. And responsible for recording and publishing most of the innovations written about our team, Sean Thornton, somewhere around here. So you have to bear with me. I'll probably clear my throat a few times. I'm getting over quite a cold. So when I was here about a year ago, which I know several of you were nice enough to join me back then as well, I spent my 30 minutes or so talking about the broader Chicago tech community and the vibrancy with which we're innovating both, on the north side and the south side, all around. Today I'm going to turn my attention more inward to the work that, there we go. So I can move the slides, to the work that we've been doing within the city to deliver on that mission that Jay talked about on behalf of the mayor. So I want to spend my time talking about the work that we're doing in the department so you can know a little bit about that. There we go. So Chicago, much like every big city around the world, is facing what might seem like some pretty insurmountable challenges. Our population is growing and changing. They're demanding more services just when the city has less resources. And we're turning to technology, oftentimes more and more, to address those challenges. In Chicago, we've turned to a very structured way to bring parties together to address those. We published about 2 years ago a technology plan to be more strategic in our ways of thinking about that. That plan is structured around 5 clear strategies that bring parties together across industries, across parties, to focus on those. We focus on next generation infrastructure, tech sector growth, focus on the skills of every community becoming smart in how they use technology to achieve their dreams. We focus on civic innovation. And in my world, I focus every day in how we use technology to become more effective government. And that's what I want to tell you about today. The way that we're using technology to make a government meet not only what the mayor is asking us to do today, but how we can prepare for an even brighter future and how the government can remain sustainable and flexible in meeting residents' needs into the future. So So really, that's really begun to show itself in 4 particular areas, and I'll go into each one of these in turn. So the first is the way that residents and business services can be more innovative and how we can remain supple in how we meet those needs over time. We're making smart IT investments to improve performance while we're able to save money. We continue to focus on open data in new ways, both to meet resident needs and to be more innovative across city government. And we're taking a collaborative approach to urban sensor technology, which is some of the most innovative and sort of envelope-pushing work that we're doing. And I'll talk about that at the end. Thank you, Miles. So I'll talk about each one of these in turn with some examples to give you a feel for what it is that we're doing. So first, streamlining resident and business services. So this is a broad focus that, frankly, the mayor pushes every department on, but mine in particular. It's a broad focus for making it easier for every resident and every business to do business with the city. So really, at the end of the day, no one wants to spend time in City Hall, as beautiful a building as it is. No one wants to actually have to go and get a permit or go and get a license. So we want that to take as little time as possible and have that be as easy a process as possible. So what are we doing? This is really the promise of paperless. So over the next couple of months, you'll be seeing the launch of several programs that will move every business license and permit online so that people can spend less time and it'll be much easier to get these permits and these licenses so they can spend, frankly, more time online and less time in line. So the 200,000 permits that CDOT issues every year will be online. The same is true for the Department of Buildings and BACP, all, frankly, by June of next year. You'll also see our procurement processes, something that I know many of you tangle with on a regular basis, going both online for those that touch you in the public and that we use internally, all streamlining the way that we do business in the city to make it easier and faster and more transparent. So going paperless makes you spend more time online and less time in line. It's easier to do business in the city so that you can spend more time focused on your business and less time on ours so that businesses grow faster. This means more growth in the city and better work for all of us. So what are some of the ways that we're investing in smart IT that saves money and makes us more resilient? So when I came into this job, and frankly for my predecessor as well, much of the city's infrastructure was aging. This is actually a really good analogy to some of the aging roads that we're working to improve in the city as well. We mean to make those same investments for our infrastructure in the city of Chicago. So there's a couple of ways, I'll go through a couple of examples, that we've been able to invest in improving our IT infrastructure so that we're able to provide better IT service and at the same time save money. So we were able to save a little bit more than $4 million by investing in better infrastructure. That upgrade has made it easier for our users. Reports are produced faster, systems run more smoothly, and all of this was done within our current budget. No new money. That's always, good news for the budget director. And so there's savings there as well as better performance. $3.5 million was saved just in our last budget by focusing on the enterprise. So what I mean by focusing on the enterprise is we invest in technology that services all 30 of our departments instead of viewing them as silos. So in this case, we were able to take a system that was being used by several of our departments for case management. So it was being used in the Department of Planning, in the Department of Family and Support Services, as well as the Department of Business Administration, and share that over to the Health Department. Now, that may sound like a bit of a stretch, but the functionality was the same. So we were able to sunset a very expensive hospital billing system that, frankly, was not any longer meeting the needs of the Health Department and implement a system that was being used by other departments in the city to a savings of nearly $3.5 million a year. Now, this is money that the city can use elsewhere. And still, the Health Department has all of the functionality that it needs from its technology. And then finally, by focusing on the specific services that the city needs and not, frankly, investing in some of the tech trends that we all hear about, we're able to avoid costs that we might otherwise incur if we weren't smart about what we were doing. So my department recently had to move out of the location that we were in, part of the city's sort of general plan around consolidating locations, and that meant moving our data center. So in this day and age, many companies are considering or are moving their data centers into co-located private data centers. So we considered that. It was frankly what almost everybody assumed that we would do. It was going to cost a lot of money. So we sat back and said, well, is that the best we can do? Is that the best we can do with the skills that we have, with the services that we need, and with the money that we have? And it turned out that that wasn't the best deal that we could get. It was actually going to be better and feasible if we built our own data center in a location the city already had. So we did that. Now, for those of you in the city, or in the audience who know a little bit about data centers, this was a pretty amazing decision to make for a municipal IT team to decide to build a data center. But we did. We finished that move about 2 weeks ago, and the picture that you're looking at up there is a really, really big crane that we had to shut down 3 city streets for a couple of hours to deliver a really large generator, not something I've ever done in my life before, to deliver some of the equipment going into that data center. But my team that runs all of the IT here in your city of Chicago built, in partnership with our facilities team, built, transitioned to, and now runs its own data center to a savings of $1.5 million a year for every year going forward in the city's budget. That kind of strategic thinking to make sure we're investing in the kind of technology that meets the city's needs not only means that we're functioning better than we were before when our technology is old, meeting the technology needs of city employees and residents and businesses, but we're being mindful about the city's budget and the resources that we have and using them to the best of our ability. And it makes me, frankly, pretty proud to know that I have a team that can take on that kind of challenge and that we can shut down city streets when we need to. So that kind of stuff, yeah. Granted, thankfully, we don't look like that anymore. Not any one of my staff looks like that anymore. But that kind of stuff where we're focusing on making our processes today better is important. And we have many projects still that's doing that kind of thing. So we're doing that. And we're doing that across every department, right? Looking at their processes today, putting better technology in place, and that's all really important. But we also spend a lot of time thinking about tomorrow, and that's more important. We don't have those chairs yet, I'll let you know. So what does that mean when I say we're thinking about tomorrow? Well, we're thinking about what our processes should be. What data do we know about to make our processes better? And what are we doing about that? So when Jay was giving me that very, very kind introduction, he started talking a lot about Mayor Emanuel's commitment to make us the most data-driven government. So he wants us to be the most data-driven government in the world. I focus on making sure that we're getting all of the data into the hands of every department that I support. And we still have a very strong focus on open data, making sure all of the data that the city uses, that we process, is available to the residents, the communities in the city for their uses as well. And we're going beyond just publishing that data, which is something that we've been committed to since the beginning of the mayor's administration, to providing tools to the public to use that data, to visualize it in a way that makes it more and more useful to them so that it resonates with them and helps them understand their communities. What you're seeing here is just a very simple picture of a map, which we're all familiar with, right? Cities are essentially maps. And what you'll be seeing coming in the next couple of months is more tools built by my department that will help residents really use the open data that we provide to them, to use that data to provide information to them about their neighborhood, their communities, their schools, so that they can interact with better, make decisions about their communities, and really engage with their neighborhoods and their communities and make more decisions about how they want to live, play, and work in Chicago. And we use that open data ourselves in our community, in our work. So when I talked before about some of the things we were doing to improve the services in our departments, much of that was focused on how to really put the use of those services in the hands of the residents and the businesses that use them. That was about going paperless, right? Putting things online. We're also doing a lot driven by data to really optimize the resources that the city does have. And this is where predictive analytics comes in. So really what that means is using data to make our services most efficient. So let me give you an example. So in the city of Chicago, we have 34 restaurant inspectors. We also have 15,000 restaurants. Not the best ratio if you're one of those inspectors. Now, and that number does not include the number of sort of food establishments like school cafeterias, et cetera, which also have to be inspected. So it's an uphill challenge. And by the way, that kind of challenge exists across most city services where we need to go out and inspect something, and the number of inspections we need to conduct is much higher than the number of inspectors that we have. So how do we make sure we're doing the best job that we can? So the number of inspections that we have to conduct in a year is set by city ordinance. So that's good. It gives us a boundary. But how do we make sure we're getting to the most serious inspections first? So historically, the manager of this service would get up every morning and set the schedule for her inspectors, both by complaints that we had received through 311 and some logical grouping of where restaurants were. Essentially, you, Inspector A, go to this neighborhood and do this group of restaurants because it's a logical, good use of your time. That's perfectly reasonable when that's the best information you have, but it does not guarantee that you're getting to those restaurants that are likely to make someone sick, right? You're doing the best you can, but it's not the best we can do today. So fast forward to developing an analytics team that's focused on using data to make government better. So what's better? What's better is looking at about 10 years of data or so, and we were very lucky in this case. This team has been collecting excellent data about their restaurant inspections for years, so we had a lot to work with. And we were able to build an algorithm that is able to actually essentially predict which restaurants are likely to have a very serious infraction, which translates to a high likelihood that they're going to make someone sick. You want to go to those restaurants first, and that's what we do today. So we're still inspecting all of the restaurants that the law tells us we have to in a year, but we now prioritize those according to those restaurants with the highest likelihood of having a serious infraction. And because of this new method, we get to a restaurant that is most likely to have a serious infraction nearly 7.5 days sooner than we would have under the previous, old way of doing things. So it's a much better use of our limited resources, and restaurant goers are much less likely to get sick. This is a great improvement in the way the city can use the level of resources it has today, and we can apply this approach of using data to improve city government to all kinds of city processes. The challenge here for me as CIO is I have 2 data engineers and 30 departments that we support. So what do? You start thinking about how to scale this model behind your 2 data engineers, and that led to a relatively crazy idea, which was the one that Jay had a little trouble pronouncing, which was trying to build an application that essentially replaces our data engineers. No offense to the data engineer over there. We want to be able to replicate what we did with the restaurant inspections across every department without needing to build every single algorithm individually while relying on the time of a data engineer. Because what we did with restaurant inspections, that kind of work can take anywhere between 6 weeks to 6 months to a year by the time we properly test it and make sure it works. That's not the best way to do this if we want to get that kind of work to every single city department and every city service that we offer. So what we're doing, based on a grant from Bloomberg Philanthropies, is building an application in partnership with the University of Chicago that will automate that process. This is pretty groundbreaking stuff. We can't go and buy this from some company, so we're building it in open source, which means the code is free to any other city or any other organization that may want to implement this. And what this will do is, when we're done, which will be about a year, is allow any city department with a savvy, essentially like statistician or analyst, prototype and test scenarios like rodent baiting on other city services. So it will help us generate much, much faster versions of restaurant inspections across other areas of city services like elevator inspections, like other sorts of investigations, like where we should be applying pothole patches versus covering streets fully. This will let us expand data-driven government to all of Chicago without relying on single data engineers. So this lets us expand data-driven government at a rate we've never considered before. So this is what the future of data-driven government is going to look like in Chicago. So where do we go from there? We start gathering new data. So up to this point, all of the projects I've talked to you about have been about data or been based on data that we already had, right? Data we had from the 311 system, data that we had in our financial system or our inspection system. All of our work to date has been based on data that we collected for other reasons from working with residents or businesses. So to get even better at doing data-driven government, you start collecting new data, and that's where sensors come in. So what's a sensor? How many people in the room are wearing a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or, okay, there's way more than that, you just won't admit it. I know I have one on, doesn't everybody wear one of those? Or a pedometer? All of those things are just sensors, right? They're little widgets, some kind of tiny little computer that collects data. That's all a sensor is. And we use sensors in the city today, right? So we have sensors in the lake that collect temperature and a little bit of information about water quality. We have sensors on our bridges that tell us when they freeze, because the bridges freeze sooner than the roads do, and we like to salt them earlier because that's a safety hazard. But all of the sensors that we've had so far in the city of Chicago have been really purpose-built for one thing, and because of the environment we have in Chicago, read the weather, they tend to degrade really, really quickly. It's hot in the summer, it's windy, it's cold. So where we want to go next with sensors is we want to deploy sensors that are designed to actually help us solve problems and that are built in such a way that we can deploy them for a long time so they really collect meaningful data that we can analyze to address those problems. So 2 examples about sensors, because this is getting really kind of not so far out there. These are projects we're actually doing, but this is pretty far away from putting, a paperless permit online. So, anybody here live on the west side and experience the flooding when it rains hard? We got one. It's awful. It's awful, and the city knows it's awful, and it's something that we're working on. So we know that one of the things that you can do to prevent flooding, besides replacing our entire water system, which is what we're doing, but one of the things that we can do to prevent the flooding when the rain overruns our combined water sewer system is implement these solutions called green infrastructure solutions. So green infrastructure are these padded flooring in playgrounds. You've probably stepped on these before. Certain kinds of landscaping that absorb the water and don't let it go into the water system. All of these things that help us divert water from the sewer system. They're fabulous solutions, except that they're expensive, and we don't know which ones work best in our communities. So we want to know the answers to that. So we're working in partnership with UI Labs to deploy sensors into several parts of the water system on the west side to test 2 things. 1, where are the bottlenecks in our water system that cause the flooding, because we don't actually know the exact answer to that. And 2, which of these green infrastructure solutions that can solve that problem, which ones work best in Chicago? So we know which ones to spend money on, right? 2 really important answers to have before you start spending expensive money on new infrastructure. This is a relatively long-term project, so it's not something I'll be able to come back in 6 months and give you the answer to, but this is exactly the way we want to use sensors to help us answer really intractable, difficult problems like flooding to help us invest big dollars better. And then one other project, the Array of Things. Some of you may have heard about this. If you haven't, the Array of Things is a truly research-based sensor project that essentially is going to function like a Fitbit for the city. So we actually don't have a lot of detailed data information about the city at what I would consider a micro level. So what the array of things will be, or is, because we have the prototype, is a set of sensors that go into a protective case that's about the size of a shoebox that we will be deploying in the city to collect information about Chicago. Now, when I say about Chicago, I mean the city and not the people. It will collect primarily environmental information, temperature, humidity, air quality, light, noise, to help us understand all sorts of things. When I say this is research-based, the reason I say that is it's not targeted at a specific problem the way the last example was, though we believe it will help us solve all sorts of problems. I'm particularly interested in the data because we don't have a lot of really low-level specific data about traffic patterns in the city. Incredibly helpful to the Department of Transportation. We don't have a lot of really, really specific data about wind shear. Very, very helpful to the architects in the city. So that sort of information will be very helpful to city employees, to several companies in the city, to community organizations who are interested in noise levels in their community. I know there's several people in here that fall into that category. And the way that, or the reason that I know that this will be available to communities is because one of the interesting things about this project is that all of this data will be available to the public. So we'll be collecting close to 45 different data fields every 4 seconds or so from each of these nodes, and all of that will be available to anyone who wants it through the city's open data portal. So there will be 50 of these deployed in the early spring next year, and there will be more deployed shortly after that for a total of 500 in the next 3 years. So if you think about this as a Fitbit for the city, this will be more data than we've had about the city of Chicago in our history. So while I've listed 2 or 3 examples of what we will use this for, what I'm most interested in are the things I don't know that it will be used for. So as you're sitting here, hopefully a couple of you have thought of a few things you would want to use this data for. I'm extremely interested in the things I don't know that it's going to be used for that will pop up from the open data community. You'll also notice there's a little map up on the corner there with dots on it. There are now 12 cities internationally that will be deploying a small number of these nodes as part of an international consortium that the City of Chicago and the University of Chicago is leading that will be testing these as well. I'm very interested in some of the benchmarking we'll be able to do in that partnership with other cities and how they use this data and what we might learn from them. So when I say this is a research project, it's pretty exciting to think that Chicago is leading a science experiment about the data about our city and the ways we'll be able to use that information to, again, improve our services for the residents of Chicago. So this is some of the ways that we'll be able to use sensors to improve services. So technology is changing Chicago today, and we're using it to think about how we need to change Chicago tomorrow. And we don't use technology to drive us, right? We want to drive technology to improve our services. So if we think back for a minute in summary, hopefully I've highlighted for you the ways that we're trying to improve services today and bring them online so that people can focus more on their day-to-day business and less the work they have to do with the city. We've focused on how we're using predictive analytics today to use city resources better, and the ways that we are using technology to drive savings in our current budget today. And then a couple of examples of how we're using sensors to really push the envelope and learn more about how we can solve challenges facing the city, like flooding on the west side, and even how we're pushing the envelope experimentally with sensors to collect more data about the city of Chicago than we've ever had before. I find this all very exciting and frankly count myself lucky to be the one at the helm of these projects on behalf of the mayor as he really pushes the envelope for how technology should be at the center of how Chicago is changing city government. So this is what I was hoping to impart to you today. that the city of Chicago is really at the forefront of using technology to shape urban government and urban service provision to its residents, that with the mayor leading the charge, there's really nothing that we can't do, and that we'll be continuing to do that under his leadership. And that with these examples as a stepping stone, we'll be doing more and more of that in the future. And I thank you for your time, that this has been a really exciting way to sort of share this story. And I hope that there are some very good questions.
Well done, Brenna. If you have a question, we have people here. Remember, you got to write it out. We got all our people here, including Amanda. You didn't have your entrance like you normally do, but that's okay. Okay. This may take a while. It's a Christy Hefner question. From Christy, what are we doing and what do you think the opportunities are to use data and predictive analytics to make programmatic, Jay, we went to the same school, funding decisions based on outcomes in areas such as education, crime prevention, and economic development, job development? Pick any one you like.
No softball from you. I mean, those are probably the three most challenging areas to apply analytics. It's always a lot easier to start with the infrastructure services. So that would be a new area for us to go to, and we are beginning to define some pilots there. The entire shift from outputs to outcomes is a new area for government, and I think Chicago is starting to make some inroads there, especially in the early childhood area, which is certainly an area of focus and passion for the mayor. And that's one of the early areas where you'll be beginning to see the application of data.
Okay. Judy Griffin, J. Griffin and Associates. By the way, you have created some of the longest questions we've ever had. Are you thinking about how to implement a property tax rebate system? Alderman Moore, if you want to leave now, we could stop.
Don't worry, Alderman.
In case the state doesn't come through with homestead and other exemptions for the property tax increase. Not a loaded question at all for you.
No, not at all. How much longer are we? So we always take the approach from a technology perspective that any technology issue is just a challenge to be fixed, that the policy team and the process folks, whichever department that is, need to define the right policy for the residents of Chicago, for the homeowners of Chicago, that the mayor's policy around the homeowners exemption was meant to protect and support. And we're going to let them finish their work first, and then we'll implement the right system. So the technology discussions that are going on around the homeowners exemption, frankly, all of that can be solved. We're going to let them settle the policy work first, and then we'll put the right technology in place to support the residents of Chicago.
Okay, we have two more. By the way, there is a question here without the person's name.
Oh, I don't have to answer that one, right?
That's a good question.
Let's see. I'll just see what it is.
If you wanted, if you want to answer,
Yeah.
you may, from anonymous, but
Yeah.
we occasionally break the rules in the club, so you can.
Do you want me to break it?
No, I'll
It's
go.
actually a good question. How is the open data useful to non-business residents? I think what they mean is to individual residents, non-businesses in the city. So we're aware of several uses where average residents, which even business owners are residents as well, who use the portal for all kinds of things. One sort of a silly anecdote, but I'll use it, is there's a great use of the data portal and application that was built on it that will alert you when the street sweeper is coming so that you move your car. I don't know about you, but I find that really useful. You need to negating the revenue issues with that for not getting a ticket. I think the comptroller's left, so I can say that. Excellent. There's also all sorts of data on the data portal if you need to find your library or your local school or the temperatures at the beach that day. There's all kinds of things on the data portal. Or if you just happen to be an interested resident in some issue in your community, noise levels in your neighborhood, all sorts of data like that you may find useful because of some community issue that you are engaged in. There's 600 data sets out there that may have nothing to do with running your business. So we're aware of all sorts of resident and community engagement that has happened with the data portal that has had nothing to do with a business.
Okay, we have 4 quick questions, and then we'll
Let me go.
go home and go to sleep. By the way, with this crowd, Mr. Tolman, you're the only crowd with all these tech people that when you say put them on the question form,
They put 'em on
hand
the
it
back.
on the joining form.
Oh.
I understand, no app, I have a rhyme, but I'm not going there.
Those are mine.
Okay, here you go. This is from Steve Scofis. Scofis, you know him.
Yep.
Have you and the city, notice, not the city and you, have you and the city of Chicago locked into the
Autonomous vehicles.
autonomous view Google car and beginning the steps to build the infrastructure to support it? A key question in the city club, by the way.
Yeah. There is definite interest and nothing to share yet.
It's great when you don't understand the question or the answer. Isn't it great? Ellen Turner. Turner?
Yep.
You know all these people.
I
You
do.
planned all these questions?
I didn't plan any of
Excellent.
them. I will next time.
You don't have to. This will go back to Ram. Don't worry. There has been, this is a big step up.
Yeah.
There has been many discussions about the city's 311 system.
311.
I say 311.
This is
Privatize.
for Gary.
It is for Gary. Privatizing it or keep it in the internal with the new technology.
Has
Well,
a
this-
decision been made?
She's
Yeah.
done it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the decision has been made.
It has. It has.
Not going private.
Yeah, it's not going to be privatized, and it's not. You can thank the mayor for that one. That was, so.
I answered that
Yeah,
one
no,
for
the
you.
mayor and the aldermen have decided it will not be privatized, and in terms of how we will be upgrading it, we need to revisit the process for that.
You know this fella? Because I can't read it.
It looks like Dan Mather.
Dan Mather.
From Sprint?
From Sprint. Handwriting, it's going down the drain.
He's a phone guy.
Brenna, thank you for the update. Can you speak to more specific on the data sources?
Social media.
You read that.
Social media we do use social media. We didn't use social media in the inspection product. It is separate though. There's a separate project around foodborne illness that does use data from social media. That's not related to this one. This only uses city administrative data. And those two projects, while complementary, do not interchange data.
The last question, and this is a special question because this is the first time anyone's just given their first name. Teresa.
I bring them out, don't I?
This is good. Where are the Fitbit data sensors going? And by the way, in this city, 100 years ago, the city club was here, sensors would be spelled with a C. Go right ahead.
That's true. That's true. There may be sensors for the
Go right
sensors. So we don't know yet where all of them will be going. There's 3 criteria for where they will be placed. So a location where we have a defined sort of research question that we're evaluating. So some of the first ones will be going on the west side because of the flooding question there that we are working on. So that would be the research question. Community support, which we'll be doing outreach to cultivate. And then there is such diversity from a geographic perspective across the city of Chicago. We'll be looking to place them across the city such that we can tap into that geographic diversity. So the first 50 will be split in half between the far west side and the loop around sort of South State Street. The rest of them, though, the other 450, the location of those has not been determined yet.
How about a big round of applause for this lady here? We got parting gifts.
Oh, I get gifts.